Imagine spending $12 at a hardware store on a Saturday morning, doing 20 minutes of work, and walking back into your house that afternoon to find it 10, 15, even 20 degrees cooler, without touching your thermostat once. No new equipment, no wiring, no contractor, just a piece of fabric and a bucket of water. That's not a sales pitch. That's a physics principle that entire civilizations mastered thousands of years before air conditioning was invented. And right now, most American families have never heard of it. Here's what's frustrating. The average household in the US spends somewhere between $200 and $500 every single summer just on cooling costs. And that's if you're lucky enough to live somewhere mild. In Texas, Arizona, or Florida, that number climbs higher. You run the air conditioner all day, the bill comes, you wince, and you do it all over again the next month. The machine never actually solves the problem. It just keeps fighting against it, endlessly, expensively, every single day from June through September. And the reason your house gets that hot in the first place, it's not the walls, it's not the roof, it's the glass. About 70% of the heat load in a typical home comes directly through the windows. Sunlight hits the glass absorbs the energy, and then it radiates that heat inward as invisible infrared radiation. Your air conditioner then burns electricity for hours trying to undo what a pane of glass did in 20 minutes. That's the cycle. And the solution was never a better machine. The solution was intercepting the heat before it got inside at all. What most people don't know, and what Hidden Fix Lab is here to uncover, is that this problem was solved a long time ago. Not by engineers, not by appliance companies, by regular families living in hot climates without access to electricity, who had to figure it out or suffer. The method they landed on is so simple, it almost sounds like it can't work. But the physics behind it is the same physics that cools your skin when you sweat, the same principle used in desert water storage for thousands of years, and the same technique that was once officially recommended by the United States federal government to rural families before that recommendation quietly disappeared. Go back to the 1930s and 1940s, and you'll find families across the American South, the desert Southwest, and parts of rural Pennsylvania using exterior wet fabric panels to cool their homes through summer. These weren't experimental setups. They were standard household practice passed down through generations. The same way people knew how to preserve food, how to build a root cellar, how to manage a well. In 1938, the U.S. Department of Agriculture published a bulletin, Farmer's Bulletin number 1772, that described this exact technique to rural families who couldn't yet afford mechanical cooling. It was printed, distributed, and then withdrawn in 1952. The reason given was that it had been superseded by newer guidance. That newer guidance turned out to be promotional material for mechanical window units. The bulletin's recommendation never returned. The principle at work is called evaporative cooling, and it operates on a fact that is so fundamental to nature that it shows up everywhere once you start looking. When liquid water evaporates, it requires energy. That energy comes from the surrounding air. As water molecules escape from a wet surface into the atmosphere, they carry heat with them, pulling it away from whatever is nearby. That's why a breeze feels cold when your skin is wet. That's why clay pots keep water cool in a desert. The air near an evaporating surface is genuinely, measurably colder than the air further away. When you hang a damp fabric panel over the outside of a sun-facing window, two things happen at the same time. The fabric physically blocks sunlight from reaching the glass, eliminating the radiant heat load, and the evaporation happening across the surface of that fabric is actively pulling heat out of the air before it ever reaches your home. You're not just blocking heat, you're extracting it. There's a difference. The reason this method faded from mainstream practice isn't mysterious. From the early 1950s onward, the mechanical cooling industry went through a massive period of consolidation and marketing investment. Industry groups funded magazine articles, trained home economics educators, lobbied building inspectors, and ran promotional campaigns that framed traditional cooling methods as outdated, inefficient, and primitive. It wasn't that the methods stopped working. It was that the commercial incentives to keep selling alternatives were strong enough to gradually replace the knowledge. Skills that had been household common sense for generations became culturally invisible within a single decade. That's not unique to cooling. It happened with home food preservation, with natural building techniques, with dozens of practical skills that families used to own for free. The evaporative method was simply one of the casualties. People who still use this method today, rural homesteaders, off-grid builders, passive house enthusiasts, consistently report temperature differentials of 15 to 20 degrees on hot, dry days. In drier climates like New Mexico, Arizona, inland California, or the Central Plains, the effect is strongest. In more humid coastal regions, you still get a real benefit, typically in the range of 5 to 10 degrees, which is genuinely the difference between a room that's livable and one that isn't. Combine the exterior fabric shading with deliberate ventilation management, opening shaded windows in the early morning to pull in cool air, closing them before the sun gets high, and creating a natural airflow path through the house, and the results compound. The goal is to use the cool pre-dawn air as thermal mass and then spend the rest of the day protecting it. Here's exactly how to set this up, and you can do it this weekend. Go to any fabric store or hardware store and buy 1 yard of heavy unbleached cotton canvas. Look for 10 to 12 ounce duck canvas, which is the thick, workwear grade material. Make sure it has no waterproofing treatment, no stain repellent coating, and no synthetic fiber content. It needs to be 100% natural cotton. This will cost you between $7 and $9 depending on where you buy it. Pick up a small pack of brass cup hooks, the kind people use in kitchens for hanging mugs, about $2. Grab a 1/2-inch wooden dowel from the lumber section for around $1.50. And get a small roll of natural jute twine for another $2. Total cost, $12 to $15 per window. Cut the canvas so it's about 2 inches wider than your window frame on each side and roughly 4 inches taller than the window height. Fold the top edge over the wooden dowel and staple or stitch it in place so the dowel sits across the top like a curtain rod. Screw the brass cup hooks into the outside of the window frame, 2 on each side, evenly spaced. Tie short loops of jute twine to the ends of the dowel and the bottom corners of the canvas. Hang the whole panel from the cup hooks so it sits about 1 inch away from the glass. That gap is not optional. The air gap is what allows evaporation to occur freely and lets warm air rise away from the surface. Each morning before 6, take a bucket of cold water, soak a sponge or cloth, and wet the canvas until it's saturated but not dripping. The whole process takes 3 minutes. On the hottest days, re-wet it once around noon. That's the entire system. A few important limitations to understand. This works best on south-facing and west-facing windows, the ones that take direct sun for 3 or more hours a day. It works significantly better in dry climates than in humid ones because the driving force behind evaporation is the difference between current humidity and the maximum moisture the air can hold. In very humid conditions, you'll still get a benefit from the shading alone, but the evaporative component will be reduced. Also, do not use synthetic fabric. Polyester, nylon, and treated blends will not absorb and release water properly. Only untreated natural cotton, linen, or hemp will wick moisture at the rate needed. And be patient. The full effect builds over the course of a morning as the interior temperature stabilizes. Here at Hidden Fix Lab, the whole point is recovering knowledge that actually works, not chasing the newest product, not spending money you don't have to spend. This particular technique is as old as desert architecture. It was used in ancient Persia, in North Africa, in Spanish colonial homes, in early American farmhouses, and it still works today with the same physics it always had. The fact that most people have never tried it isn't a reflection of whether it works. It's a reflection of how thoroughly a cultural shift can erase practical knowledge in just a generation or two. Your great-grandmother probably knew how to keep a house cool in July without plugging anything in. That knowledge didn't disappear because it stopped being useful. It disappeared because something more profitable replaced it in the conversation. The question now isn't whether it works. The question is whether you're willing to try something that costs $12 before you pay another $400 on electricity this summer. Set it up this weekend. Measure the temperature before and after. Let the numbers tell you what to think.